TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
How is artificial intelligence being applied in TV production? How can AI shape the TV shows of the future? And how are producers using it today to create amazing content? Find out on this week's TellyCast. This week, we're looking at artificial intelligence in TV production with Guy Gadney, CEO of Charisma.ai, a company at the cutting edge of interactive TV production, and Michelle Singer, COO at UK comedy indie Rockerdale Studios, as they talk us through the past, present and future of AI in TV. It's all coming up on this week's TellyCast. This week, we're taking a look at AI, artificial intelligence in TV. Now, we've seen plenty of series, Humans, Westworld, and Person of Interest, to name a few, that have based their narrative on AI and robots. And we know that there's machine learning at work when it comes to surfacing the content we're served up to watch next on Netflix or Amazon or other SVOD services. But what about the use of AI in content production? What's going on right now, and what does the future hold? And how can producers harness this technology that's been integrated in most other aspects of our lives? Joining me to discuss these issues and more are Michelle Singer, COO at British comedy indie Rockerdale Studios, and Guy Gadney, CEO of Charisma.ai. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi.
Hi.
Great to have you on. Guy, coming to you first. Tell us a bit about Charisma and what you do as a business.
From our standpoint, I think AI has sort of evolved a little bit from being a very technical space and almost an informational base into now something more creative, and is now a tool which we can use for storytelling, for immersive storytelling, for writing new stories and accelerating that creative process. So what we do with Charisma is we've developed the Charisma.ai platform to allow all of that to happen. So it's a bit of a technology that people can write into in the same way that if you wanted to write a novel, you might write it into Microsoft Word. If you wanted to write a movie script, you might write it into Final Draft. For interactive and storytelling, then Charisma is the platform to do that. And then it also powers out these great sort of animations and video experiences as a final product.
Can you give us some examples of the projects that you've worked on?
Yeah, so I think we cut our teeth actually with my startup prior to this, working with the TV industry, spotting a particular niche, which was that, as we all know as audiences, once a show finishes and there is that gap, that vacuum between series, there's almost like this emotional grief that happens while the show is off air. So what we did was we pioneered mobile and online stories that bridged that gap, that kept people interested and engaged in the storyline. And what we found doing that, which was for shows like Home and Away in Australia, up to Sherlock with Hartswood Films here in the UK, was that people really emotionally connected to the characters, as distinct from, say, the story world or the narrative. It was the characters that people really connect with. So with new advances in artificial intelligence, we're able to bring these characters to life. And we have done that for a number of projects now with the BBC, for Sky with Bulletproof, and now we are working with Warner Media in the US, looking at how these sorts of characters can come to life so people can talk to them as if much as in the same way I'm talking to you now, or I'm on a video conference with someone. I can be immersed in their world, in these fictional characters' worlds, talking to them and having, I suppose, an extended experience with a TV show.
Now, I suppose many people have come across this sort of interactive storytelling through, I suppose one of the best known projects was Bandersnatch, right, on Netflix. Yeah. Can you give us a bit of background on the history of AI in TV, and what have been the key points in its development?
Well, firstly, Bandersnatch was a real catalytic moment, I think, for this. It was a moment where the industry suddenly looked at Netflix and went, "Wow, if they're backing this, then this is going to be serious." And indeed, Netflix, continues to invest in this area. However, what they're doing is not artificial intelligence. It's not what we are focused on, or indeed using that sort of technology. I think within the creative industries, AI to date, and especially recently, has been very much the topic of the series. So you mentioned Humans, you mentioned Westworld. In the movie world, similarly, we've had AI as a very important central theme of the storyline. But where we're now heading to, of course, is that reality is catching up with the fiction, and AI is starting to have a significant impact in development, in production, in screenwriting, and indeed in the in creating new story formats as well.
There's been some recent developments that I've been tracking, and I've included a few stories on the TellyCast Plus newsletter on a few occasions, and that's really looking at what Unreal has been doing. Now, Unreal is a video games developer, or has become known as a video games developer. Have they developed the concept of digital humans, or did it exist before Unreal? But can you tell us about this whole idea of digital humans, and what are they?
Well, I think for many of the listeners who maybe have been focused on television and then had that view slightly changed during lockdown by seeing all their kids playing Fortnite and so forth, that's Epic Games. That's the Unreal Games engine, which is owned by Epic. And Epic is an astonishing company. They have focused historically very much on this technology, on bringing three-dimensional worlds to life in a believable way and creating games based on it, and of which Fortnite is one and possibly the best known within that demographic. And they have really been pushing to eliminate the gap between what is perceived as games, as slightly pixelated or almost comic style experiences, into really high fidelity visual experiences. So it's not only that it's interactive, but it looks like it's come straight off screen. And I think that's the key difference here. And as you say, one of the key steps forward that they made recently was to release these metahumans, which are, highly detailed three-dimensional avatars of human beings, or whatever shape or form you want them to be. And I think the difference here is that we're starting to now see this sort of technology, as I'm sure many people will have experienced, being very useful into that television production process, whether it's virtual production of sets, or indeed, fill-in scenes where you may have to go back and normally you'd have to go back and bring the cast back in and spin up the set and all of those things. Now we can drop in these more virtual characters into set and make that production process a lot more seamless. So to my mind, I think they are a real milestone actually in bridging to industries, the video games industry and the video production industry, which historically, I suppose, has had a bit of a gap between it. And for that reason, I think it's super exciting.
If we're saying that there's a problem, there's an issue that you discover, or something happens in post-production, and you need to get the actor back or some talent back, and they can't, they're on another project, they're unavailable. What you're saying is it's possible to create a digital human, or meta-human is the term that you used, version of the talent. And, perhaps they can voice it from wherever they are, but actually the technology now is completely photorealistic, so you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
In certain scenes, absolutely. And I think it's twofold. So what you've got something as a scenario you've just explained, which is where it's going into an edit, it's in post-production, and then it's sort of locked off, right? So you output it as a piece of video, and done correctly, the audience will be none the wiser, and that's fine, and that completely achieves that goal. But the revolution, I think, that we see is that because this sort of tech has come from the games industry, you can do it in real time, and that changes all sorts of things around my world, around doing interactivity, so that these characters that you see on screen are able to be talked to, and they render out their performance is real time like a theatre actor. That's exciting. And also for a director, and I've seen some astonishing examples on the set of The Mandalorian and Star Wars, you are really able to see the final setup with CGI and real actors in real time or virtually, all set in using the Unreal Engine as a virtual set. So I think it's both ends of the spectrum. One is that development and pre-production, production, and then the other one, as I said, the revolution is then being able to have these characters come to life in ways we've just never seen before. And audiences love it, by the way, because they're closer to the stories, they're closer to the characters they love.
And what you were saying earlier on about bridging the gap between series, and we're finding that now probably more than ever when we know how scripted production has halted. I'm a fan of Better Call Saul, right? And it's usually, a year or so between series. And then it's also the way that it plays out. It's one episode every week, sort of old style. But, if there was a way of immersing myself in that universe in between series, but also in between episodes, what you're saying is that this technology exists now to be able to create these sub-stories and deeper stories around the characters.
Creatively, absolutely it does. But it's more than that, because you've got to ask why, why bother? And actually, there was one project I'm thinking of in particular we did for RTL a few years back, whereby bridging that gap between episodes, and indeed by bridging the gap between series, that mainstream primetime series saw a 25% increase in audience share, And as you know, to move an audience share by 1% is significant. 25% was crazy, and we did that 2 years running. So it's not just, I think, that we can do it, but the why from a business perspective and a return on investment is because the audiences will then stay closer to your show and love your show, and you get the recommission. It's that simple.
And this is about brand extension as well, isn't it? Because we're talking about, some of these huge scripted dramas, or it could be unscripted as well. But, these media properties are brands in their own right now, and you can actually start to extend these brands into exciting new areas, and obviously really keep control of it as well.
Yeah, and my view is if you don't do it, you're not doing it justice. It's that, again, you're not doing justice to the brand or the show or the characters, or indeed all the work that has gone into it. Having built up all that work, it makes complete sense to leverage it out into other media that which is where the audiences are. And I think that's sort of the no-brainer for me. Why wouldn't you? It's an important piece to do, and we've seen audiences shifting their behavior over many years now. Netflix, SVODs, move to binging has exacerbated that. The pandemic has exacerbated that. As we see that change, I think it is vital that as creators and as an industry we move towards it, because that's where audiences are at, and if we don't, then we'll find that our audiences are diminishing.
It's really exciting, actually, if you think about it, because you could, possibilities of creating mini-series particularly for social media platforms, using familiar characters. The possibilities are endless. I guess the one question is it out of the park expensive when it comes to investment by media businesses to use these metahumans, or this new development by Unreal, does that make it much more cost effective?
No, it's not out of the park at all. And our experience has shown us over a number of years now that the closer you integrate with the production of the TV show that is being produced, the more efficient and the more cost savings you get. Naturally, if you have to recall talent and you have to do all of, to do voiceovers, or you have to recall talent for whatever reason and then spin up sets, then things start to get a little bit complicated. The closer we work with the broadcasters, with the production companies, not only the more efficient is it and the more cost effective it is, but actually creatively you hit the level of excellence that everyone's looking for, that we're looking for, and that the producers are looking for. And that shows on screen, and that shows with the audiences. So I think it's totally not out of the park. And I would almost see it as a part of the series. If there's always a character who you sort of want to see a little bit more of in a series, and never quite gets the screen time that it eventually gets, and audiences sense that, then that's usually the character that we'll target. We'll look at, let's bring that one to life, bring up their backstory, bring up a storyline which may have hit the cutting room floor, and see how we can expand that. That's a formula that usually works.
We'll include some clips in the episode description to recent Charisma projects as well, so everybody can go and take a look at Unreal as well and see the potential of that fascinating area. Michelle, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. As opposed to being a business specializing in AI like Guys, you're a content producer who's recently utilized AI in terms of deepfake. Tell us a bit about Rockerdale Studios, and you're one of the fastest growing comedy indies in the UK, right?
Yes, we at Rockerdale Studios have two founders, the disabled and the Jew, as we call ourselves. Stu Richards is our creative lead. He's alarmingly prolific as a format generator. And I take on the sort of operational and production lead. We formed about 4 years ago, almost exactly to the day, actually. We formed making our first series, which was a reality sitcom called Bobby and Harriet Get Married. And we've gone on to make scripted comedy and unscripted formats for everyone from the BBC to Channel 4 to Comedy Central to Quibi, RIP. And we work across linear, and certainly over the last few years, our focus has been towards digital first content. Last year, we made 4 studios debut social first branded entertainment series, which was Mission Accessible. And I think really inclusion is very much at the core of who we are, both in terms of our content. Brad Boys, the sitcom we made for Channel 4, for example, focused on predominantly South Asian heritage young people in Bradford. We spent a lot of time up there, filming there and using people on and off screen from that part of the UK. Mission Accessible, that I already mentioned, is probably the first travelogue hosted by somebody with cerebral palsy. And we've been running out a lot of mentorships, again, with young people, predominantly not from the traditional areas, let's call them, of television intake behind the scenes.
Congratulations on your success so far. Now, you were recently commissioned by Channel 4, another recent commission by Channel 4, to create some deepfake content in what's probably the network's first commission for their TikTok channel, which is, obviously a very good example of their digital first strategy. Tell us about that project and how it came to be.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. It is the first of Channel 4's bespoke pieces of content that we made. And it's sort of part of a suite of deepfake featured content that we were making for 4 Studio, which also has larger pieces of content on their various other social platforms, everything from Snapchat to YouTube and to Facebook. And really, this is about us being quite innovative with deepfake technology and comedy, so that our aim is to dominate the space, I would suggest, for comedy purposes. And we tried and tested a few different tasters incorporating deepfake technology for comedy ideas. So we were able to very rapidly, happily, have a very efficient and certainly good value for money workflow via those tasters. We nailed the team of people involved in order to create genuinely funny, entertaining content with deepfake technology at the heart of it.
Yeah, and this was basically the deepfake of Greta Thunberg.
Yes, it was. Yeah, in time for this year's Earth Day, we had our impressionist, who's phenomenal, performing the scripted piece as Greta Thunberg. And then in filming that, we then applied the deepfake technology in post so that suddenly Katya morphed into our Greta. And we had a very sort of sassy version of Greta, the Greta Thunberg you tend to see on her own social media platforms, actually. So we played on that, on her sassiness, whilst the core message was still one of climate change and the environment. She had a certain swagger about her that was particularly enjoyable, and certainly the degree of disappointment that she felt at having to sometimes stoop to an audience that was going to listen meant that she created a deep-faked TikTok dance challenge, which people have joined in on, by the way. If you look on TikTok, you will see Man Like Greta. You'll see lots of people having learned the choreography and then recording themselves either alongside our Greta or independently, which is such a joyous thing to watch. And then the longer form video content is her taking us through the choreography and explaining how she landed on particular steps for that. I should also add, we created a we created a music track specifically for the TikTok and the other pieces of online content as well. So you could, should you be that way inclined, you could even download our music track. Again, Man Like Greta.
Right, fantastic. Well, we'll include all the links again in the episode description to Man Like Greta. And it sounds, an incredibly creative process that you've been through with this when it comes to recording music, but also everything that goes around the comedy writing and the production. But from a production perspective, how do you go about creating a deepfake and a deepfake comedy content? I mean, what you mentioned you did a couple of tasters, but take us through that from somebody who, before you'd even got involved in using this technology. How did you approach it, and what was the process?
It is complex, and I don't wish to suggest that it isn't, but mercifully, having sort of tried and tested a few times with a variety of other creative ideas, it's really the first time I think that we have worked on something where, frankly, the legal side of things deeply informs the creative. The two things really very must go hand in hand. And that's actually an exciting proposition rather than what we might find more typically in production terms. But the idea that you might play with those dials of comedy to ensure that the technology isn't a thing that stands out. It's not gimmicky in any way, but also that the comedy shines through, because ultimately that's what drives everything. And also we're on a legal sure footing. It becomes a really interesting and creative collaboration right from the get-go. It excites people, both in terms of commissioners and the sort of script writers and the performers involved, and those people who are involved with the technologies too. So to see it as a true collaboration amongst all of those departments, it becomes a very sort of energized, exciting, collaborative exercise. And in terms of this specific project, we were looking for ways of introducing, frankly, the sort of unbookable world's most famous people, and how we would do that in a way that is achievable, is cost effective, is legal and inoffensive, and entertaining. And all of those things could be quite tricky tightropes to walk. And we've managed it, I think, very successfully. We're really proud of the work that we've done. And we continue to talk to various other major broadcasters at the moment, looking at other similar sort of ideas in this area of incorporating deepfake into our work.
When it comes to the process, though, I mean, obviously it all happens in post, obviously. Does that extend the post-production process significantly? Is it more expensive? Do you need to budget more for post in deepfake? Presumably you do, but is there also pre-production, a lot of pre-production work you've got to do?
I would disagree with the majority of it being done in post point, because actually having tried and established a really successful workflow for us, I would say that's not the case. But what is essential is in the planning stages, and again, that's both the sort of the legal side of things. The scripting is essential, and all the natural passes you'd expect that to go through compliance wise. But also that our technologists on the deepfake post side are involved right from the start of that process, so that we know when we press play on an idea, when we're about to prep and then go into filming it, that what we intend to capture can work. So there are various, I suppose, pitfalls that you might stumble into, the sort of the frame sizes that you're dealing with, the positioning of particularly the performer's face, the sort of considerations with regards to sort of hair and props, as well as frame sizing. All of those things, lighting is crucial. All of those things matter, but they truly inform the planning stage of the process as well. And then I would actually say that when it comes to the filming, that's quite swift because you've got your ducks in a row. And in terms of the post-production side of things, then you tend to have a swift edit. That material is then tackled by the deepfake specialists. And then once the deepfake has been applied, which doesn't take an enormous amount of time, it does obviously depend on how much content there is, as with all post-production. Once we have that deepfaked content back, that goes back into the edit. And then it's the same processes of edit that you would expect for any other production process. So the streamlining of that workflow and the constant communication between all the parties involved, particularly at the moment when we're all working remotely still, that's the essential part. But it's very easy for us at least, to have done well, because we've been working with this team of people for quite a while now.
And you mentioned the legal side of things amongst, and you've really underlined actually the detail that goes into something like this, because as you say, there's lots of different tightropes here that, that feed into each other when it comes to scripting, when it comes to legal, when it comes to lighting, when it comes to post, all of these things is fascinating. But the legal side of things, I mean, could you create, if you wanted to, you wouldn't want to, right? But could you create a deep fake of me? And what would be the sort of legal ramifications of doing that?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, you wouldn't, as I say, you wouldn't want to. I know that. Let's use that as a starting point.
Well, the simple answer to that is yes, we could, Justin. I don't want to frighten you, but yes, we could create a deepfake version of you. It pre-assumes that there are lots of separate pieces of existing video content of you out there in the world, and I don't wish to pry as to whether or not that's true, but assuming in the case of...
Well, there is. I do my videos every week to promote the podcast, so there's plenty of it out there. It's all a bit one-dimensional, but there's plenty of it out there. Don't anybody listening, don't get any ideas. But anyway.
So it assumes that the technology, it works on the basis of there being multiple sources of moving images of that person. So in the case of us sort of focusing on the world's most famous people, inevitably there is an enormous amount of moving content of those people out there. And the technology works rather cleverly to utilize almost pixel by pixel from thousands upon thousands of sources out there, pixel by pixel at the time, to build up essentially masks, let's call them, of these faces. And the technologists that we use are people who are both skilled in terms of that data collection, I suppose, the creation of that data set, and also the application of it over the face of, in our case, the performer, the impressionist. And from a legal perspective, I know you're asking that, really that comes as much into question of the content itself, which is why the script and the idea really matters, because deep fake can be, in certain parts of technology at the moment, the sort of Wild West. I'm sure we're all aware of deep fakery having been used in the world of political videos, and dare I say it, in the world of pornography too. So there's a dangerous aspect to the technology, but embracing the technology from a comedy, from an entertainment point of view, requires a knowledge of the law for sure. And we had lots of very interesting but truly collaborative conversations with the commissioners' legal departments as well, in order to work out ways of how we can do this rather than the things we couldn't do. And so as long as you're very on top of the legal situation, as without wishing to bore people, I very much am. That's wholly in my wheelhouse. There are lots of very creative things that we can do with the technology. And fundamentally, that's what matters. We're not particularly interested in a gimmick in and of itself, but utilizing the deepfake technology to enhance a format. That's absolutely our sweet spot. And the generation of IP through that sort of innovation is what we're all about.
Well, fascinating stuff. We'll incorporate a few clips so everybody can take a look. But the man like Greta is fantastic. And when I first saw a clip, actually a still, as I was about to watch it, it made me laugh. It was so extraordinarily realistic and very, very funny and very enjoyable. So everyone go and take a look at that. What's next for Rockerdale then? You're in the Indie Lab Accelerator program, right? Are you looking to expand? Are you looking for investment? Are you looking to start to sell internationally? Where you're at and what are your ambitions for the business?
Yeah, we did the Indie Lab Accelerator in 2019. And since then, we've both been growing our sort of domestic buying base. And also we're working with some companies in the US on several of our projects out there. And we've got a focus on international expansion from both a co-production point of view and from a format sales perspective. And we're also engaging in various conversations with prospective investors, both here and internationally, in order to sort of further develop those formats and expand our team and expand the territories in which we work too.
All the very best with that. Guy, how about you? What's the future for Charisma?
In parallel, we've just come out of the Creative England Accelerator Evolve, which was fantastic for us and opened up a whole new set of opportunities through Creative England. So kudos to them for putting that one on. That was great. And then I suppose on the other side of the coin, we've been working with Digital Catapult, a digital accelerator in London, on really some cutting edge new technologies around what we do around AI and 5G. So I think all of that is setting us up nicely for the other side, for sort of, I suppose, the other side of 2021 and into 2022, which is all doing what we always do, which is good storytelling. And I think it always comes down to that, whichever medium we're in. So I think we're looking forward to developing further with Warner Media, and of course, then big news coming out at the moment of the various mergers and restructures they've got there, and similarly, I think we've just appointed a head of our New York offices over the last few weeks, which is exciting and really looking to grow those relationships. The competition amongst Netflix and HBO and Disney and all of the SVOD providers and and technologies is only increasing, and they're looking for innovation. We know they are because they're talking to us about it, and we think it's going to be a really exciting time.
Well, it certainly is. And just hearing you both talking about, not only the technological development in the future and the potential for it, but also the real life application of this sort of technology now from a commissioning perspective that's happening right now is really fascinating. So well, best of luck to both of you in everything in the months and the years ahead. And now it's time for Michelle and Guy to pick their stories of the week, the TV industry news items that have caught their eye in the past 7 days. Michelle, what's your story of the week?
Well, mine is the very delightful return, although it's a slow reopening, of theatres and cinema from this Monday. I think it's really clear to us that those worlds, those parts of the arts landscape are so invaluable to us from a UK freelance sector and skill set point of view, and those things translate right across the TV board too. So it's my happy place as well, the theatre. So I'm absolutely delighted to see that cautious return. Can't wait to get back into the theatre myself.
Yeah, fantastic. And I also saw yesterday that Sheffield Docfest is actually going to be having some real live screenings in the weeks ahead as well. So that sort of brought it home to me that actually we can go to the theatre, we're going to the cinema, which is really exciting, and look forward to doing that myself as well. Guy, how about you? What's your story of the week?
Well, the breaking news, obviously, in the TV industry at the moment is the Warner Media AT&T Discovery deal. But I think you guys will cover that as it evolves. Mine actually was more of an HR one, and I do very much second what Michelle's saying about just the opening of the doors and the freelance sector as well as doing the work that I do. I'm chair of the Old Fire Station Theatre here in Oxford, and we have been feeling it as everyone else has, and so I'm very pleased about that. But I think there was interesting moves at Sky for me, and the appointment of Cécile Frocoutaz I think was very interesting. Cécile has spent time recently as head of YouTube in the EMEA region, and I think knowing what YouTube has been doing and the way that they approach things around levels of engagement with viewers, how formats develop, how budgets are used, I think will be a very interesting approach into Sky Studios as those sort of three pillars of TV production are married between a YouTube aesthetic and Sky Studios. So I find that a fascinating story, and we'll be watching that one closely.
I'm finding fascinating the fact that we're starting to see, as this is the case, we're starting to see a few executives coming from these new media digital players, and not only Google, but as you say, YouTube, but also Netflix and other streamers, and they're coming back into linear TV. And particularly when it comes to senior executives, the experience and the knowledge and the strategy that they've learned in the time that they've been with these businesses is going to be really important for these linear networks or distribution businesses or whatever types of business they are to really upscale and compete in this new media landscape. So it's a really fascinating time, I think, with top talent moving around.
I would totally agree on that. And as much as anything, and I mentioned this before, I think it's an acknowledgement of people understanding that audiences have shifted, and that deep understanding of audiences that one gets through online platforms, as distinct from straight, free-to-air broadcast, is now rolling back, and we will see that acknowledgement of digital experience and those business models, I think, change the landscape fairly dramatically in the next year or two.
And now it's that time in the show where my guests get to nominate their hero of the week and who or what they're telling to get in the bin. Guy, who's your hero of the week?
So my hero of the week goes to the games industry and EA in particular, and the creators of FIFA 21. So in the new release of FIFA, they are putting in Cayenne Prince. Now, Cayenne, if you're a QPR fan, you will know, tragically stabbed to death in 2006, and he would have been 30 this year. And they're putting in Cayenne Prince's as a player, as a virtual player into FIFA 21, and I think that is a really strong mark of the sort of social impact actually that the games industry can have, and it's good at it. The games industry is pioneering this sorts of inclusiveness, and as with all of us could do better. But I think this is a great mark, and I was really pleased to see how they've stepped up on this.
Yeah, that's a fantastic move. How about you, Michelle? Who's your hero of the week?
Well, this week my hero will be Davina McCall and the team that I think they were from Fine Stripe, who made Sex, Myths and the Menopause that was on Channel 4 last week, for a programme to cover a subject matter, very frankly at that 13 million women in the UK are menopausal at the moment, so could well and truly identify with, plus their partners and colleagues and families, a matter that clearly will affect 51% of the population. And it's a subject matter that simply does not get enough mainstream media coverage. And so it's about time that we saw more and more of this kind of content that's inevitably going to affect most of us, frankly. So I was absolutely delighted to see that programme and looking forward to many more touching on the same subject matter.
Yeah, and we'll include a link to the episode as well. Guy, who or what are you telling to get in the bin?
Well, so I've got my eye on someone here, and I'm hoping I don't have to do this. But if it does happen, then Gavin Williamson, who looks like he might be stopping 50% funding cut to the arts subjects in higher education, he is on the verge of going straight into the bin if he does that. I think it's an absolutely dreadful move, which not only for culture but for industry is borderline crazy. And following on from that, it's worth just noticing that a recent report out yesterday that coming out of Australia, that for every $1 billion in turnover in the mining industry, for example, an additional 472 jobs are created, whereas in the arts and entertainment sector, for every $1 billion in additional turnover, 4,297 new jobs are created. So if we want to be a powerhouse country in the future, excelling in all our ideas and creativity and imagination, our sector is the place to invest.
It seems incredibly short-sighted. So he's teetering on the edge of the bin. Maybe we should get Oliver Dowden to have a word with him, and Culture Secretary of the UK, obviously, to see if they can change that. But you're right. Investment into UK creativity is something that is really important to safeguard, I think, and it's just shown how incredible an export it is for the UK when it comes to creative works, whether it's TV or film or games or lots of other creative areas. So absolutely, fully agree with that. Michelle, how about you? What's going in your bin?
Well, for me, this is very personal, but it will be the anti-Semitic response in the UK to the current Israel-Palestine conflict. I'm an atheist Jew, but the connection to me of a country I've never been to that's thousands of miles away is literally zero, except that due to what seems to me to be a terrible government there, me and people like me in my community are bearing the brunt of those decisions and currently living, very sadly, in very real fear and encountering racism that I would not expect to have to be dealing with. And it is truly upsetting and intimidating. People like me in my country should not have to deal with the kinds of racism that we're currently having to deal with.
Absolutely. No, it was pretty frightening over the weekend when footage did emerge on social media of some Palestinian demonstrators shouting all sorts of anti-Semitic remarks, which obviously went viral very, very quickly. And I think that has, it's obviously pretty much universal revulsion on that. Absolutely. Fully appreciate that, Michelle. And let's hope that this situation will move forward in a peaceful way, and people can sort of open their minds a little bit more. Michelle, Guy, thank you so much for coming on the show this week. It's been fascinating to hear about artificial intelligence, deepfake, comedy production, and the future of technology when it comes to TV. Thanks both so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. It was great.
Now, we couldn't let this week's show go by without discussing the latest developments in the streaming wars. And there's been two big ones reported over the past few days. It's like the London buses analogy. And joining me to bring us up to speed on those deals and the rationale behind them and the ramifications is City AM Analyst of the Year, Ian Whittaker. Ian, how are you doing?
I'm all right, Justin. How are you?
I'm very good, very good. Thank you for coming back on the show. Great to have you back on TellyCast.
Thank you.
This deal with AT&T. So US telecoms giant AT&T has agreed to combine its Warner Media business with Discovery in a deal to create a new streaming behemoth to challenge the big three of Netflix, Amazon, and Disney+. Take us through the deal.
So if you look at how the deal has been structured, it's effectively, from a share transaction standpoint, tax efficiency has been the key priority. So what's happening is it's effectively what they call the reverse Morris Trust transaction. It's an all-stock deal. As part of that deal, AT&T receives probably around $43 billion. That's a combination of cash and also as well debt securities. And in terms of shareholders, so AT&T shareholders will control 71% of the new company and Discovery shareholders 29%. Now, if you look at the sort of projections they've given, what they're talking about is for 2023, talking about the combined company having approximately $52 billion of revenue to the adjusted EBITDA of $14 billion. They're also talking about at least $3 billion in expected cost synergies annually. You'd expect that would be a conservative number. They could probably get some more out of that. But for both sides, it actually makes a lot of sense. From an AT&T standpoint, it has to be said that when it comes to owning media assets, it's been somewhat of a disaster for them. Obviously, they had to take a big write-down on the valuation of their direct TV stake that they bought at the top of the market and for a significant amount of money. I think in terms of this transaction, what it enables AT&T to do is really exit its media assets in a very graceful way. So if it had tried to sell these assets individually, almost certainly it would have got a much lower price than actually paid for these assets. And what this allows them to do is sort of exit in a way in which it can say, look, we still control the majority of this company. This is going to be a much bigger company. It's going to have much greater scale. We'll be a much bigger player when it comes to the global streaming environment. If you look from a Discovery standpoint, Discovery is the minority shareholder, or Discovery shareholders are the minority shareholders within this transaction. We've had David Zaslav, who's now becomes the CEO. So it seems very much as though this will be a Discovery-led company in terms of the strategy. And for Discovery, from a stock market perspective anyway, they had been seen to be doing reasonably well when it came to streaming subscriber numbers. But obviously they don't have the scale of somebody like a Netflix or indeed a Disney. And what this new behemoth creates is really somebody or an entity that has the scale to take on Disney and Netflix sort of on a comparable level. So strategically, it makes sense. There's an argument for saying that AT&T definitely had messed up when it originally bought its media assets, but sort of the worst thing is often to not correct a mistake. And in doing this transaction, that's very much what it's done. And I think for Discovery, again, sort of as mentioned, it gives it a bigger platform on which to play.
And it all automatically slots it into fourth place, I think, when it comes to subscriber numbers, because we've got HBO and HBO Max with 64 million subscribers worldwide, and we've got Discovery, which is obviously only relatively recently launched, but that's got 15 million subscribers. Obviously, we don't know how many of those are actually paying subscribers. Very few, I would imagine, right at this point. But that really brings it into fourth place, not far behind Disney Plus. They're thinking that maybe subscribers are going to stretch to 4 of those subscription services, which is going to be the Netflix, Disney Plus, the Amazon Prime, and maybe this new business. Any more than 4 seems to be a bit of a stretch on the old pocket to anybody. And also, who wants to have 8 different subscriptions to streaming services? People are going to be starting to rationalize that, aren't they, a little bit?
Well, exactly. I mean, there's an argument for saying who wants 4, whether 4 is a big enough number as well. I think when it comes to this deal, there's a couple of things for us as well that this type sort of would prove advantageous for one or both sides. If, for example, you're AT&T, you knew with HBO Max, because of some of the content deals that you signed, that you were prohibited from going into some quite valuable markets until a couple of years down the line. So, for example, HBO Max couldn't be launched in the UK until 2025 because of the deals they've got with Sky. Now, by that point, an extra 4 years is an eternity when it comes to the streaming landscape, and you risk being effectively locked out of the market. Now, it's still the case HBO Max can't come into the UK until 2025, but by tying up with Discovery, what you're enabled to do is work piggyback off the Discovery subscriber links that be in place, and therefore HBO Max could be slotted in that sort of environment. I think when it comes to the streaming services, one big problem I think you have here is that this has obviously been led very much by US media giants. The US media landscape is different from the European landscape. And if you look, for example, at what's happened overnight with TF1 and M6 coming together in France, what you can see happening is effectively a US market where obviously it's an extremely big market. There's a potential for a number of different players to operate. But potentially what seems to have happened is the US players seem to have looked at Europe and thought, well, Europe pretty much has the same dynamics as the US market. And that's not really the case. In Europe, it's very much about individual countries. And very much the broadcasting habits are quite national in nature. You get some markets where US programming content is extremely big, but in most markets, domestic language content that really drives things. And I think the risk for these streaming giants is what they've done is said, we can see the US market. The US market is 330, 350 million people. Obviously, we've had great success there, bundling up with mobile offerings and so forth. Why don't we go and conquer the rest of the world? Well, the problem with that is that if you look at the rest of the world, you have China, which effectively is off limits, many of the Western media companies. You've got India, which is open, but you've got a market there where when you look at the ARPU trends are flatlining or indeed declining, where you've got quite fierce competition and monetizing the customers quite. And then you've got Europe, where you look at it and you think, well, yes, that's fine. You've got valuable customers, but you have media markets that are quite individual in nature, and where increasingly the national broadcasters are starting to roll out their own services. And I suspect what will happen with the streaming world, as it were, is that you could have potentially sort of max, maybe 3, possibly at a stretch 4 global companies that are viable. And then what you get, particularly in Europe, is you get a number of national players acting within their own markets, or maybe within 2 or 3 markets across Europe.
Yeah, so it's not a slam dunk for them. It's not a case of the straight into fourth place if they make it a very attractive monthly subscription to, like $5.99 or something like that. It's still not a slam dunk for them.
Definitely not. And this touches on as well so Amazon and what they've done with sort of the potential, or the rumor talked, that they're going to buy MGM. You've got bigger capitalized players in the likes of Amazon, potentially Apple as well, who are interested in this space. Now, they have far more firepower, and arguably as well, they have far more customer relationships than many of these streaming companies do. So if, for example, those players decide to get a lot more aggressive when it comes to the streaming market, because we've talked about sort of streamers in terms of, if you want to call them the pure play streamers, Netflix is, Discovery Stroke, AT&T, Disney Plus, and so on. What happens is if you want to call them the sort of multiplayers, sort of who decide to launch a lot more aggressively in the streaming market and say, well, this is just one of several services that we offer, as opposed to just a streaming service that the pure play streamers provide. And there's a case for arguing that those multiplayers are maybe in a better place to dominate the market in the future than the pure play streamers.
Absolutely. No, you're right. When it comes to scale, Amazon, if it gets particularly ambitious, if you look at its content catalog, does have some really, really great content, but it's quite thin. But, just being able to say, okay, we're going to buy MGM, we're going to buy the James Bond franchise, and, automatically, just by being able to, pivot like that, then, then you've got to say that, if they want to get ambitious, then, it's going to have a really big impact on the market. And so this is going to be fascinating to see how it develops. What about other expected deals? How do you think this is going to affect the overall M&A market within media, Ian? Do you think it's going to set off a whole new cycle of M&A activity?
Well, there's a couple of obvious areas where it could do, stroke will do. Streaming services, for one. There are too many players in the market at the moment. So there's a real question mark over some of the other players. What, for example, do you do with Viacom CBS, this sort of environment? What's the potential future there? What happens with somebody like a Roku in the States? Again, they look as though they're moving more to owning the content, and that puts them in conflict with some of the media owners. I think, funnily enough, the second angle is more to do with what's happened. And again, it's got implications. What's happened with AT&T and Discovery also implicates what happens here as well. But also what happens in the European markets when it comes to M&A, because with TF1 and M6 coming together, there's no way that deal would have been announced if they hadn't have had the approval, or at least the tacit approval, of both the government and regulators beforehand. And so what that would seem to suggest is that regulators and governments are coming round to the view that in this sort of global environment where broadcasting is no longer national, but it's really across boundaries, the scale very much counts. And what were counted as domestic giants before now look like minnows on a global landscape. And I think they certainly would have looked, for example, at the newspapers and seen how the newspaper industry was decimated by the likes of Google and Facebook coming in, eating up its ad revenues. And yet for years and years, regulators in many markets would stop deals between newspapers on the ground of competition issues. And in hindsight, that just proved to be incredibly short-sighted. And I think there's a sort of a willingness there from governments and regulators to realize that they can't allow the same thing to happen to the broadcasting industry. So I would have a look and see what happens in the European landscape over the next 12 to 18 months. I think that's going to be very interesting. If I was to say which countries potentially could be the next stage for broadcasting consolidation, I'd say look at Spain and look at Germany. Both markets where I think governments and regulators would have an interest in having national champions. In both markets also as well, with at least one of the broadcasting groups, and certainly two in Spain, that you've got large shareholders that can push through a consolidation. I think this is really going to start to gain more and more traction now. And I think both what's happened with AT&T and Discovery, and again, what's happened with TF1 and M6 in France, what they both demonstrated is that when it comes to broadcasting, scale counts. And that's going to drive M&A activity.
Fascinating stuff. Ian, thank you so much for joining us. We could speak for hours about this, I'm sure. But listen, thank you for joining us. Fascinating to hear your take on it. Look forward to having you back on the show very soon.
Thank you very much, Justin. Take care.
Well, that's about it for another week's show. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to TellyCast and share it with friends and colleagues. And another quick reminder to sign up for our free newsletter called TellyCast Plus. It's packed with interesting TV industry stories of the week you might have missed, downloadable reports and surveys, and exclusive insight and opinion, including the secret producer, our intrepid anonymous exec reporting from the front line of TV production. It's all completely free. Just visit our website to sign up at telecast-podcast.com. And you can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Telecast was edited by Ian Chambers. Until next Thursday, as always, stay safe